Good Tuesday morning, BAMWX.com, meteorologist Michael Clark here with the latest long-range forecast update. I tell you, back on the 19th, we issued this update that talks about the very, very wet pattern unfolding, and that's exactly where we are now. It's all based on MJO and analogs, but here's our current hazards map, and we see flash flood watches hoisted from Michigan all the way down to Texas, in the heart of the Ag Belt here across Iowa as well. So some very heavy rainfall in the forecast, and it's unfortunately, probably a pretty good forecast. This is only out to 120 hours using the numerical blend of models, blending all the data together, and locations in here across central Iowa, southern central Iowa, southeast Nebraska, kind of right in here is kind of the core of that stuff. Moderate risk for flash flooding rainfall here, and computer model guidance of upwards to 5 inches of rain. Apologies there, guys. I had to cut it off and add this in, but this is the latest NAM WRF, the 3 kilometers, a high resolution model. And again, we're looking at areas in here across southern Iowa. This is where the moderate risk of flash flooding is. The modeling putting out over a half a foot of rain. I wouldn't be shocked if there's some 10-inch rainfall figures here in southern Iowa, and then again possibly in southern Wisconsin. This kind of looks where the core of that looks to be. So something to consider. Here's your 5-day precipitation from the European model. And again, you see it's dry here into the east under the ridge. Challenging an all-time record high today in Indianapolis, 93 degrees, the warmest it's ever been this late in the year. The record high is 89, set in 1897. We're going to shatter a bunch of records today. All right, again, the 5 to 10 day, I think there's a relax because a trough does work in and high pressure comes in. So I think the pattern can relax for 5 to 8 days before it can turn wet again. And I think some of the modeling is too dry in the longer term of things. I'm going to use the GEFS, the ensemble. I think it's handling things the best. Here's the 5 to 10 day. And again, there is a trough that comes down, and temperatures do cool off somewhat. They become average, if you will. And it kind of in between there, you can see where there's a stint of somewhat cooler weather. But then as we get back into the 11 to 15, you can still see a little bit of a cooler suggestion. I think the model might be a tad too cool of surface temperatures. But the pattern I see coming back is one that may possibly bring back more precipitation. All right. And that's the reason for that is because of the possible gradient, I think, that can reestablish itself with some eastern U.S. warmth and troughs running into that scenario. From the evening run, this is the change in the 2-week outlook from 6 hours ago. The ensemble did trend wetter, and to me it just makes sense with the forecast into week 2 based on how I see this pattern evolving, and I do think ultimately that the warmth does come back for a time into October. But I think that this area here can get active again. A lot of what I'm basing that off of is we're continuing this standing wave in MJO phase 1. It's just not moving. It's just continuing. The phase 1 in October looks like this, and then there's its precipitation. Okay, and then even into November, it's the same look. It's a good phase to be in if you want colder weather, but it's also very wet in both months. And so it's just a stalled out look here. And so I think the models are just not, I think they're hanging on to the dryness too long. I'm not saying there's not a break, because there is, but I think the excessive, the precipitation can come back. I think October still runs the risk of being very active. And it may not be enough time to dry out before, the next round comes in. If we do favor the GEFS, its HDD forecast would suggest that we are running at least above the 10-year normals out through the 11 to 15. It's kind of up and down, and I think it can continue to be that way. I think it's primarily warm, but there can be intermittent shots of colder air. Okay. And this is the deal, with the MJO, and I talk, this is that standing wave. This is the European next 46 days, and it keeps this standing, just strong MJO suggestion all the way out to November 15, where we have this phase 1 or 2 of the MJO active here. And, if we keep the angular momentum negative, I think that's a huge factor going into November for cold. Okay, I think that's possible. This is the latest daily AAM run from the European. Here's 0 up here. I mean, I don't even have anything plotted above 0. The latest run continues to keep us somewhere around -2 out to day 15. But the AAM is it's tanked. It's very negative, and I don't see that changing. All right, and even looking into our other organic methods going into October, I think, just looking at October in general, the negative AAM is going to keep it warm. The organic methods are going to keep it warm. All right, the correlation for the negative AAM in October keeps it warm. Very warm. It's a very, very warm correlation east, and you can see this correlation here to the west. And so that's why our outlook looks the way that it does, because I still think we can bring cold fronts in here, and there will be intermittent shots of cooler weather. It's not going to be consistently above normal, but it is going to end, I believe, much above normal. And it's possible that we could even have a case of reds out here and being 3 degrees or more above the average for the month. But if the AAM stays negative, we're looking at the European weekly here, the last several runs, and this is out to now to November 15 of a negative value here of possibly negative 1.5. If it stays that way out to that time frame, I believe that November has potential to get cold. I do. And this is looking at negative AAMs since 2000. Obviously, there are other things to factor in here, but I do believe that this is something to consider because the AAM has been kind of a front runner here. And so it's something that we need to consider, need to look into. I could make the case for winter really getting going late November into December this year based on some gut feelings, based on what we're seeing. But if you look at the weekly models, I don't think they're correct because what they're doing is the ensemble mean is taking the angular momentum positive. I'm looking at some of the minimum members in the ensemble suite because the weekly has a positive bias for the angular momentum. And if you look at the first 2 weeks of November, it looks like this. Well, it's the opposite of the correlation here. It's the polar opposites because it's doing the polar opposite with the AAM. So is the CFS. CFS has a terrible positive bias with the angular momentum. So I think these models are incorrect to open November. I think we can be dealing with some cold. That's my early thought as of October 1. I'll keep you posted. If anything changes, you'll be the first to know. But let's keep in mind that I think the wet trend can hang around and the general warm east, cool west, and northwest theme continues through the month of October. Then we could be talking about at least some cold here into November.